Morning, guys. So, is everyone who's in here meant to be in here? Are you all expecting the state of the nation? Nobody's expecting anything different. Fantastic. Now, I want to give a caveat before I start. How many of you guys are feeling happy and optimistic and full of joy right now? Fantastic. I am really sorry about what I'm about to do. Okay, the next 50 minutes, I'm gonna put a precursor on this. There is some really exciting stuff, but there is some really depressing stuff. I did this same talk about a week ago, and somebody came up to me at the end and said, that was the most depressing thing I've heard. I need to go home and change everything. So if you want to leave now, that's absolutely fine. I won't take offense. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking through 5 of the big pieces of research which were done amongst young people last year. And what our hope is through this is some people are really pro-research, some people are really anti-research, but actually I think that research gives us a really good lens as to where young people, where church, where faith is at in this country. Because actually when we have a realistic expectation of where people are at, that helps us to focus our ministries in a better way that enables us to reach more people for Jesus. Amen? Wonderful. So if we get the next slide up, the 5 pieces of research, I am mixing all 5 of these together because I'm a heathen. If you want to go and look at any of them in more depth than I'm going to show you, that is absolutely fine. They are all online, but you can go and you can read all the reports in their full entirety, but we've tried to kind of thread them together. So the first one at the top, Talking Jesus Youth. So that was done. So Phil Timpson earlier mentioned Mission Academy Live. So Mission Academy Live came as a response to the Talking Jesus Youth research. So that was done in partnership between the Hope Revolution Partnership. So Hope, the Church of England, Soul Survivor, Urban Saints, Tear Fund, the Message Trust, Elim, Youth for Christ, and Pays Movement. That's quite a collaboration, isn't it? It was conducted by by an organisation called Comres. So all of these, they've been conducted by proper research companies. It's not just me going out with my clipboard. That there were 2,000 people who were talked to. They were all aged 11 to 18-year-olds, and they were all in England. It was conducted online. It was weighted. So I'm just going to explain a couple of those things. Conducted in England, somebody asked me the other week why some of the slides it says young people in England, and they wondered whether I was part of some kind of far-right movement. Various different bits of research. For the Talking Jesus Youth piece, that was just asking young people in England. Some of the ones further down, they asked broader than that. Hopefully it's reflected in just how the question is phrased, but that's why the question is phrased like that. Where it's weighted, what that means is that they've taken the research and they've adapted it so that actually if they've asked loads of people who are from London, actually that's not going to be proportionate if you're trying to give results for the whole country. So they alter slightly what the representation is across, so that actually the results which come out at the end are hopefully representative of the whole country. Next one down, Losing Heart. That was done by the guys at Youthscape. Again, Christian Research did that. Just over 2,000 churches in England, Scotland, and Wales. They went a bit further. Quantitative and qualitative. So for those who don't know what that means, quantitative is we're just going to ask you yes, no, tick the box. And qualitative means that we're going to ask you some follow-up questions about that. We're going to dig a little bit more into it. And that was unweighted. Gen Z, that was the research which was done by Youth for Christ. So Phil Knox, earlier on, what he was speaking about Sync, that came out of this piece of research. So that was done with a little bit over 1,000 young people, 11 to 18, England, Scotland and Wales, online, unweighted. Faith in Our Families, that was done by Care for the Family and Hope. 983 parents, 175 church leaders, 479 children's workers. All people who described themselves as practicing Christians and parents who had at least one child aged 3 to 11, quantitative and qualitative. And then finally, mapping practicing Christians. That was done by the Church of England, Comres, had a whopping 8,000 people as part of it. And that was done with adults online. Don't worry, the rest of it is not as boring as that. So yeah, like I said, if you want to go and look them up, just Google them, you will find them. Or optionally, come and grab me at the end and I'll give you a link to them. Cool. So if we can get the next slide up. We're going to work through these, looking at them under some titles. So the first one is looking at what are young people's priorities. So we're talking primarily 11 to 18-year-olds in this. So we can get the next one up. So Phil Knox talked about this earlier. What activities or hobbies do you enjoy doing in your spare time? 81% of young people said watching YouTube videos. Followed up 77% TV and films, 74% using social media, 73% spending time with friends. Gaming, sports and exercise, reading, music, and shopping online. You know what I find really interesting about that is that those top 3 answers can all be done sitting in your bedroom without really personally interacting with anyone. There is something about this generation where everything is done online, and actually that is where they are spending their time. If we can get the next slide up. That actually, if we push them a little bit further and we ask them, well, how often do you do that? 94% of young people say that daily they go on social media. 77% say they listen to music daily. 75% go on YouTube daily. 73% read, and 73% are gaming daily. So not only are they doing it, but they are doing it with intense frequency. Bring in the next slide up. This is what's interesting. We then asked them about what was it that made them feel good about themselves, what made them feel happy. Top by a long way, 93% friends, 92% family, 26% music, interestingly. What makes you feel bad about yourself? 67% said social media, 41% said friends, and 40% said YouTubers. So actually, there is this paradox where for young people, they are in an unbelievably committed way spending their time online, on social media, and interacting, but simultaneously, they are saying that that is the exact thing that is making them feel bad about themselves. I didn't mention this. If you're interested in which of the bits of research it comes from, just down in the bottom right-hand corner, kind of it's slightly hidden behind the drum screen for me, there is a little logo there which will tell you which piece of research it's coming from. But there is something in this which is really interesting. If we can get the next slide up. If we then push them a little bit more about, so in your own life, what are the top 3 things that you are most worried about? School and exams, 54%, appearance, 33%, and 30% what others think of me. That actually this is a generation who are incredibly self-conscious about what they look like, about how other people view them. That actually they are hugely aware of that. But actually what is quite comforting is alongside that is that actually there is this view beyond that, that actually when pushed, what are the top 3 things you're worried about in the world? War and terrorism, 51%, poverty at 38%, and racism at 24%. So there is this concern broader than them. But actually there is something about this kind of, this self-image, this what do people think of me, which is crucial to this generation. We can get the next slide up. So moving on, looking at faith. What do young people's faith look like? Get the next one. So this one is really interesting. So Talking Jesus Youth was a follow-on from another piece of research called Talking Jesus. So Talking Jesus asked adults, would you say that you're a Christian? And within that, understandably, you get nominal Christians, you get inherited Christians, you get cultural Christians, people who tick Christian because it was the one nearest the top. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people will tick that. And so what they did was that they set a criteria for what they would class as what they referred to as practicing Christians. And for them, practicing Christians was defined as those who went to church once a month and read their Bible and prayed once a week. Now, we did the same thing with young people, and what we found was that 41% said that they were Christian. Now, that's fine. We've got our nominal, inherited, and cultural within that. But when we then applied that same criteria as to what qualified as a practicing Christian, 13%, that's 13%, filled that they were reading their Bible and praying once a week, and that they were attending church once a month. Now, I can see from the horror and confusion on your faces that you are like, Jimmy, you are confused. There are not 13% of people in our church. And actually, this research got a lot of abuse because of this statistic. But actually, what is really interesting about this is that it is quantitative, not qualitative. That actually, we didn't ask them, you know what, which church is it that you go to? Tell me about your church. What does your church look like? We just said, do you go to church? Yes or no? How often do you go? And for 13%, there is something in their life that they think is church. I'm going to repeat that again because I think this is key. For 13% of 11 to 18-year-olds, there is something in their life which they think is church. Now, that might be a chapel service in their school. That might be that they go to youth group. It might be that their scout troop meets in a church. But for that young person, if you say, are you going to church? They say yes. And as the church, we go, no. I think you've got that wrong. Church happens on a Sunday morning. I think there is a huge challenge in this about, as church, as the people who are following Christ, how do we look at these spaces that young people are going to and they think is church, and how as church do we inhabit those spaces in a way where we are able to share what it means to be a follower of Jesus? I think that is a huge challenge from that. What's interesting is that actually beyond that, we had the power of hindsight. We were doing this after the adult piece. And so we asked a follow-up question and we said, would you define yourself as an active follower of Jesus? Now, I will give you can get confused, you can tick Christian through some sense of obligation. Nobody is ticking, I am an active follower of Jesus through a sense of obligation. That's quite a specific phrasing, right? We're all agreed on this. 21% said yes. 21%. 1 in 5 young people said yes. Now, that same look of confusion is over all your faces. No, Jimmy, you're wrong. If 1 in 5 young people was an active follower of Jesus, we would have revival. It would be wonderful. We would not need this conference. Within that, I think, again, there's a really interesting question to be asked. If 1 in 5 young people think that they're an active follower of Jesus, where are they? What does that mean? That actually, whether that's aspirational, whether that is that they've pieced together a couple of things, and we're going to look a little bit at maybe where that's come from, but in a culture which we are consistently told it is hard to be a Christian, 21% of young people are willing to go a step further than that and say, I'm not just a Christian, I'm an active follower of Jesus. Interestingly, if you pair that together with some of the other questions, some of those who ticked, yes, I'm an active follower of Jesus, also said that they didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God and they didn't believe that Jesus rose from the dead. So there's some interesting definitions as to what that means. But there is an openness and a willingness that I think for most of us, we really struggle with, because that's not what we're seeing in our churches. But I genuinely think when looking at this research, we are looking at one of the most open and willing to explore faith generations that we have ever seen. And as the church, I think we need to look at what that means. We can get the next slide up. The YEC research, Gen Z, they asked, would you consider yourself a follower of Jesus and the Christian faith? 59% said that they would consider themselves a follower of Jesus and the Christian faith. And if you break that down to specifically followers of Jesus, 19%. So actually, within statistics, that's pretty close. So that's not just one piece of research. That's a completely separate, completely independently done piece of research, which is finding exactly the same thing. That there is this openness and willingness to identify as, whether it's aspirational or whatever else, but wanting to follow the person of Christ. That's exciting, right? If we can go on to the next one. This is a little bit alarming. So the mapping practicing Christians asked the question, at what age did practicing Christians come to faith? Now, 40% said that they came to faith before the age of 5. Now, I'm from the Church of England. I'm all right with this. Now, there's probably some Baptists in here who are rocking slightly at this point. I think what that actually means is that we have brought into the picture that the only people who we ever hear testimony from is, this is Jack. Jack was in a gang, and when he was 18, he shot a man, and he ended up in prison, and Jesus appeared to him in a blinding light, and isn't it wonderful? But actually, hands up if you have a young person in your youth group who that is their testimony. Probably not many of us. That actually, for the vast majority of our young people, their testimony is, you know what, I grew up in a Christian household. Mum and dad were Christians and we went to church. And I've always kind of known that God was real. There's never been that light bulb moment where I've gone, yes, I've always followed Jesus. You're going to tick that box, aren't you? And actually, we're going to look at that all the way through this. Actually, what is that impact of growing up in a Christian household? Interestingly, the second biggest one, 11 to 18-year-olds, I think we all know this. It's one of those stats that gets kicked around all the time. 56% pre-11, 75% pre-18, 83% pre-25. If you don't feel affirmed with your church leader and your church in what you're doing, take that statistic back and go, you know what? I think I should get 75% of the church's funding because I'm doing 75% of the work. See how that goes down. Interestingly, though, if we can get the next slide up, if you ask the counter question, and this is being asked to adults, at what age did you stop becoming a Christian? 11 to 18, 37%. That actually it's really exciting that if young people are that's where young people are coming to faith, that it's in those teenage years. But we have a two-way street going on here. That we have got young people coming in, but we have got young people going out. And actually what that realistically looks like for most of us is a little bit of a plateau. I think there's something really interesting in that about not only how do we do evangelism, how do we get those who are outside to come in, how do we get them to make a commitment to follow Jesus, but I think there is a counter question of how do we do better discipleship, which means that once they're in, they don't decide to go straight back out again. How do we retain those who we've already got? If we can get the next slide up. So moving on, let's start to grapple a little bit with what do young people actually believe? And this is really interesting. If we can get the next one up. Young people believe different things about God and Jesus. So the benefit of doing this across lots of bits of research is that some of the bits of research asked young people about their belief in God. And some of them asked the young people about their belief in Jesus. And there are really different answers. So when it comes to God, 32% of young people said they believe in God. 22% believe in ghosts and spirits. 47% don't believe in any. Let's get the next slide up. Let's ask them about Jesus, and it changes. 54% believe that Jesus was an actual real person. So over half of young people are sold in that Jesus is not a mythical thing like the Easter Bunny, that Jesus is 100% real. Interestingly, going underneath that, 37% of young people not only believe he was real, but they believe he rose from the dead. 37% believe he rose from the dead and was a real person. Now, when we talk about the task of evangelism, I think we're most of the way there, okay? They're sold. They believe Jesus is real. They believe he rose from the dead. Really, all we're doing is we're just coming in and just picking up the pieces. Interestingly, the Talking Jesus research was paired alongside the adult research. It's exactly the same amongst adults. In fact, it's more so. 43% of adults believe in the resurrection. They believe that a real Jesus really rose from the dead. 43%, that's huge, right? There has never been a more open generation than there is now. But somehow as the church, we have become crippled that nobody is interested. Nobody wants to know, and so we're not talking about it. And as this research goes on, you're going to see the impact that it has when we don't talk about it. Because if we can get the next slide up, what you start to find is that when we start to ask them about what it is that they actually believe, you've got 21% who believe that Jesus was God in human form who lived amongst people in the first century, 13% a normal human being who was, but not God, and 29% believe that he was a prophet or a spiritual leader, but not God. So there's something in that they believe, but they're trying to figure out what does that actually mean, what does that look like. If we can get the next slide up. Push them a bit further. So the YFC research asked them about what some of those habits look like. So we talked earlier about those who pray and read their Bible. Actually, do you pray? 41% of 11 to 18-year-olds are saying, yes, I do pray. And actually, 47% say that they pray once a day. So actually, prayer is something which is ingrained in them. That actually, whether that looks like arrow prayers or whether that looks like half an hour at the altar, there is young people already engaged in the discipline of prayer. Are we building a picture here? We've got young people who believe in Jesus. They believe he rose from the dead. They're already talking to him. This is exciting, guys. This is as exciting as it gets for the research. It's going to get a bit depressing after this. If we can get the next slide up. What do young people think about Christians? So actually, as Christians, we're saying this is exciting. Young people are really open. They want to know this. Let's see how they view us, because the story is that we are scary people, that they don't want to talk to us. No. Next slide, please. Firstly, we've got an issue in visibility. 45% of young people do not know a Christian. I'm going to say that again because that's a big stat. 45% of young people do not know a Christian. I'm not talking an active Christian. I'm talking anybody who identifies as a Christian. That's not their friend. That can be their mum, their nan, their lollipop lady, their teacher. They don't know anyone who's a Christian. 45%. That is a huge visibility issue when we are saying that this is the most open generation that there's ever been. If we can get the next slide up. The YFC research found that it was slightly higher, that 61% said that they did. But this is interesting. What do you think about that person? That they are kind, thoughtful, considerate, nice, loving. They're a family friend or they're a neighbor. They're good, they're honest, they're trustworthy. They've got positive experiences. They're normal people. There's this quote which they put in which it kind of kills me a little bit inside. They are normal like everyone else. Their faith doesn't change them. It's good that they think we're normal people, but surely our faith should be changing us, right? What Miriam talked about this morning, that actually we're not called to just exist, we're called to transform. And there's something there again about how we're discipling young people, about what it means to follow Jesus. We can get the next slide up. The Talking Jesus asked the same thing of young people, like, what do you think of the Christians who you know? 67% friendly, 52% caring, 35% generous, fun, encouraging, and hopeful. Right? We are well known and we are well liked. Like people think we are good people, right? Now somebody said, well, if you're only going to give them those words, then of course you're going to get positive. If we can get the next slide up. Oh no, we asked them a whole bunch of negative words. Narrow-minded, boring, pushy, homophobic, selfish, unhappy, mean, liars, and stupid. You know what's interesting? They are small percentages. There is a tiny minority who don't think that we are nice people, who think that we are those things. A tiny minority, the vast majority, think that we are positive, that we are friendly, that we are happy, that we are welcoming, and that they want to talk to us. But yet as the church, we go, shh, don't talk about it. If we can get the next slide up. Let's ask, what do young people's attitudes about evangelism, what do they think about it when we talk about our faith? Because that's what we're pushing towards. So YFC asked, if you were invited to find out more about God, would you be interested? They found that 18% said that they would be interested, that 26% said they weren't sure. So actually, even within that, they're still open to it. If we can get the next slide up. Following that up, the Talking Jesus research found that 16% wanted to know more about Jesus, 16% were open and interested to an experience or an encounter with Jesus. 26% felt more close to the person, and 56% felt comfortable. What's interesting about this is the group who this was asked. Now, for a brief moment, I want you to imagine that I am here to sell strawberry milkshakes, okay? We're excited about this. This side of the room, you guys love strawberry milkshakes. They are the best thing. You are drinking 10 strawberry milkshakes a day. This side of the room, you hate them. You are lactose intolerant. They are not good, okay? Now, if I were to do some research about what people's opinions were of strawberry milkshakes, and I were to do it with this side of the room, what kind of research am I going to get? Positive, yeah? Overwhelmingly positive. This side love them. If I do it with this side, what am I going to get? Overwhelmingly negative. The people who they asked here are the people who have had a conversation with a Christian. The Christian has talked about what it means to follow Jesus, and they have decided, no, I'm not interested. I want to remain a non-Christian. That 1 in 6 of those who don't like strawberry milkshakes have decided that they are not interested in the message of Jesus. 1 in 6 of them want to know more. They're happy to have a conversation, and they'd like to have a spiritual experience. That's huge. 1 in 6 of those who aren't interested are actually interested. Imagine if we did the same research with the other side of the room. I think, again, there is something here about the openness of people to talk about faith. The Mission Academy Live, which Phil talked about earlier, that's where that number of 6 young people has come from. It's come from this statistic that if you pick any 6 of your friends, that one of them, statistically speaking, which is obviously how God works, statistically speaking, one of them is interested, probably more. There's a fantastic story, a colleague of mine who was very involved in the adult piece. The adult piece, so you can see that underneath, that's even higher. That's 1 in 5 amongst adults. She was talking about this and she said, you know what? 1 in 5 of your friends who are not Christians want to know more about Jesus. And the person who they want to know about it from is you. And there was a girl sat in the congregation and she said this, well, she didn't say, she thought in her head, this is absolute rubbish. So she took her phone out and she went, I'm going to text 5 of my non-Christian friends and I'm going to prove her wrong and I will humiliate her afterwards. She didn't actually say that, but so she got her phone out and she went to the first non-Christian and she texted the first non-Christian and she said, hi, do you want to come to church? And then she went to find the second non-Christian in her phone. Before she could find the second non-Christian in her phone, the first Christian had texted her back and said, I'd love to. That sounds amazing. I think there is an openness that we have never seen before, but we are crippled by fear that nobody is interested. I think there is a huge challenge to the church about how can we excite people, how can we equip people, how can we get people to step out when it comes to sharing their faith. We can get the next slide up. Let's move on. What influences young people in their faith? Interestingly, when others, 22%, when others talk about their experiences of God, 15% answered prayer, 17% experiences had by other people, 17% people I know, 15% when things don't turn out well, 18% kind gestures by other people, 24% thinking about life. You know what's really interesting about that list? They are almost all relational. They are almost all in contact with people who they already know, sharing what their faith means to them. That actually, when we think back to the start and what the things that young people are doing, they are interacting from a place where there isn't that relational value. And actually what they're saying is that the place where they experience faith, where they think about faith, is in that relational value. There's something really interesting about how we can better encourage that in young people. We can get the next slide up. Who influences you? 73% said family. Overwhelmingly the majority. 36% friends, 36% teachers, 23% TV and the media, 21% the news, 11% info and videos online, 9% celebrities, 9% youth workers. So guys, just to put that in context for you, young people are as likely to be influenced by you as they are by celebrities. In fact, they are twice as likely to be influenced about their faith by the news than they are by you. Like, that's an upsetting statistic, right? That actually, when it comes to young people, friends and family are the number 1 and number 2 people. I think, again, this asks a huge question. How are we better equipping young people when it comes to talking about faith with their friends? And how are we better equipping families to talk about faith? Because actually, if they are the number 1 and number 2 ways that young people are exploring faith, then we need to get better as a church about how we can resource that. We can get the next slide up. This is really interesting. We asked, what were the 2 or 3 biggest reasons that young people had for coming to faith? What were some of the biggest influences? Overwhelmingly, the largest, growing up in a Christian family, 41%. 21% reading the Bible, 17% Sunday school, 15% going to a religious school, 15% going to a regular church service. You know what's really interesting? They're all really old ways of doing it. That as the church, we've gone, no. These are things we did in the olden days. We don't do those anymore. We have modern, new ways. No. The young people are saying they are the ways, they are the primary ways that they are wanting to explore faith. The primary influences on them coming to faith, the second biggest one behind the family, is reading the Bible. Now, I don't know why, but that surprises me. That when young people pick up the transformational word of God, that it changes their lives. I love asking this question. You don't have to put your hand up. How many times in your youth group do you bring out the Bible? I know that when I was a youth worker, the answer was not very often because I was a bit scared that it might scare them off. It's the second biggest influencer. I think another thing which is really interesting about this is that down here, 13% visiting a church. Now, when this research came out, the Telegraph picked up on this and they loved that stat. And again, lots of people went, really? 13% visiting a church. And what's interesting is that is different from going to a regular service. That is different from going for a wedding or a funeral or a baptism. That is different from a youth group. That is visiting a church. Now, that really shouldn't come as too much of a surprise when you realise that 45% of young people don't know anyone who's a Christian, and every year 6 in this country is taken to a church to meet a vicar. That means that when that young person walks into that church, for that vicar, probably half that class, that vicar is the first person they have ever met who's a Christian. All of a sudden, when St. James's School down the road is coming to visit your church, that transforms that visit. Because we are saying that for 13% of young people, that is going to be one of the most transformational things in them coming to faith. That for half of them nearly, that is going to be the first encounter they have with anyone who follows Jesus. That actually what I think probably for many churches is almost an inconvenience is probably one of the most evangelistic things that we have at our disposal. What's really interesting, if we can get the next slide up, is that we carried on this list. 5% a youth children's camp event or festival. Now, I love Soul Survivor, I love New Wine, I love Spring Harvest. They are wonderful. But according to these statistics, they are as influential in young people coming to faith as a dream or a vision. That's huge. That actually, I think there is something about how we're doing evangelism that sometimes we are looking for new and we are looking for shiny, and most importantly, we are looking for one big bang that's going to do it. And actually, for young people, they're saying it's not one big bang that does it. It's the regular, repeated, boring stuff that as the church we're starting to give up on. It's that stuff that makes a difference. If we can get the next slide up. This is really interesting. The Faith in the Families research. It found that faith amongst families is key. However, among Anglicans, they had a specific stream for Anglicans. Amongst Anglicans who say that religion is very important to them in their lives, only 36% listed religious faith as an especially important quality that children can be encouraged to learn at home, compared to good manners at 94% and tolerance and respect at 83%. That actually for parents, faith is not on the radar. Remember from the start, these aren't kind of give it or take it or leave it kind of parents. These are parents who themselves have defined themselves as practicing Christians. Only 36% think that faith is something which is important to pass on. If we can get the next slide up. Moving on from that, 28% of church-attending Christians report that they do not mind whether their children share their beliefs or not. And this one I find particularly terrifying. Despite 85% of parents believing that they are primarily responsible for their children's spiritual development, they also genuinely believe that the church is better placed than they are to actually do it. That's huge, guys. What we are saying is we are saying that the very group who young people are saying is the most influential people in helping them to explore faith, in being one of the key things on them coming to faith, that very group don't know how to talk about faith. That they're not talking about faith, and that actually we've created some kind of bar of excellence in their minds, that you've got to be of a certain standard or a certain caliber or know a certain set of words to be able to do that. And so what they are doing is they are offloading it to us as the church, to us as youth workers, to as church leaders. They're saying, you know what, you guys are better at this than us, so we'll let you do it. We are missing a huge opportunity there. And I think one of the real challenges in this is, as youth workers, how much engagement do we have with families? Again, I know thinking back to when I was doing parish youth work, barely any. Most of my young people came from drop-ins. If I was lucky, I knew what their family setup was, but I probably hadn't met mum or dad. Actually, how can we look to be more intentional about the ministry that we're doing with young people, also engaging parents? Because we have a group here who statistically are so influential, but are feeling so unprepared. If we can get the next slide up. Churches. How do churches feel about sharing faith with young people? Surely as the church, we feel good about this, right? If we can get the next slide up. How effective do you think your work is? Let's start with that question. So the Losing Heart found that children's work we're pretty good at. 73.9% felt they were being effective in their children's work. Now we push them to their youth work, 51%. 26.4% of church leaders felt their youth work was ineffective. Now you've got to ask a question. If you think your youth work is ineffective, why are you not doing anything about it? And I think there's a resignation in that it's probably not going to get any better. At least we're doing something. If we can get the next slide up. What we found is that actually in correlation, it made an impact how big your church was. If you were in a big church, 150 plus, that actually 75.6% thought that it was effective. Going right down to actually, if you're in a church of under 50, it is more likely that you believe your youth work is ineffective than that it is effective. There is something there about, as a church, we are lacking confidence that what we're doing is making any impact. That belief that actually, what Miriam was talking about this morning, that actually the power of Christ, the power that Jesus has given to each and every one of us, that amazing gospel message, that it might actually be able to transform the lives of the young people that we work with. If we can get the next slide up, this I find really interesting. They asked them a whole bunch of things about what they talk about and what they don't talk about, and asked them how often they talk about it. Now, I'm aware that's super small, and I'm sure that all these slides can be emailed out or whatever, so you can have a dig. But the one which I want to talk about is right at the very top. Basic Christian beliefs. How often do you talk about basic Christian beliefs? Only 50% of churches said that they talked about basic Christian beliefs often in their group. 22%, nearly a quarter, said that they never talked about basic Christian beliefs. These are the young people who have made it through the door of our churches into our youth groups, are interacting with Christians who they know, and a quarter of them nearly, we're not even talking about what it means to follow Jesus. So really, it shouldn't come as any surprise to us that when we go, are you an active follower of Jesus? They say yes, and we go, what does that mean? And they go, I don't know. Because we're not talking to them about it. We're not doing that basic stuff about what does it mean to follow Jesus. And I don't know whether that's because we're afraid or because we don't want to say the wrong thing. But actually, where we're not talking about it, what is happening is young people are just making it up themselves. They're piecing it together from what their friends say. They're piecing it together with what it says on the internet, what the news says. And you know what? It really then shouldn't come as any surprise to us that when they hit that key age, that 11 to 18 age, that they decide they want to walk away from it. Because we're not telling them what it means. We're not telling them what it means to follow Jesus and how that changes their lives. I think there is a desperate need to not only address our evangelism, but desperately a need to address our discipleship as well. If we can get the next slide up. How do Christian young people view the task of sharing faith? So, the church isn't feeling great about it. Youth workers, we're not feeling great about it. Families are not feeling great about it. It's down to the young people. Let's see how they feel. If we can get the next slide up. Oh, I think we've missed one. If we go back one. We skip past? No, sorry. There we go. Next one. There we go. 12% of practicing Christians do not feel comfortable talking about their faith. 12%. That actually there is a confidence issue there. That 1 in 4 young people admit that they are afraid to share their faith. That actually there is this paranoia that if I share my faith, it's going to offend people. How do we overcome that? How do we start to change that narrative from people aren't interested to people have never been more interested? If we can get the next slide up. Interestingly, that thing which we talked about with families, that the church is better served, young people are inheriting that. They are hearing that from us and they are believing it themselves. 43% of young people think that most, if not all of the time, that other people are better at talking about their faith than they are. That what they really want is that if faith ever comes up, that they can tag team somebody in to talk about it on their behalf. That there is an equipping issue there about how are we equipping young people to be able to talk about their faith. Their faith, not out there as somebody else's faith, their personal faith. What does it mean for me to follow Jesus in my life? 43% think other people are better at talking about that than they are. 29% of young people say that they don't know how to talk to a Christian about Jesus most, if not all of the time. Again, we're expecting them to do it. We're not showing them. We're not teaching them. I think there is a huge issue in that around what we have as far as models go for youth work, for evangelism. That actually, when you think about it, for young people, how many times do they see people actively talking about their faith? And I think what I would argue is that there are probably only really 3 examples of this. There is J. John or Mike Pilavachi, or someone who stands on a stage with an American accent in front of 10,000 people. There is their vicar or their youth worker who is paid to do it. And then finally, there's the crazy man who screams outside the station. And actually, for young people, none of those are relatable. None of those are achievable. And therefore, they draw the conclusion that this isn't for me. I think we need to be asking a question about how we can better model what does it look like for us to share our faith with our friends. And actually, how do we do that together with the young people? Because I don't have the statistics on it, but I would guarantee that there's a whole bunch of youth workers who feel exactly the same. I think we can do this with our young people. I think we need to step out and have a go, because if you haven't picked this up, there has never been a more open generation than there is now. How do we get better at modeling it? If we can get the next slide up. We've got 8 minutes remaining. What I would love for you to do is turn to your neighbour, and we're going to just try for a couple of minutes just to try and address this, because you're probably feeling fairly beaten down right now. You're feeling like it's worth giving up. Maybe you need to change everything. So there are 2 key questions. Given all this research, what are the key questions that we need to be asking? That can be you personally, that can be your church, that can be the church as a wider thing. What are those key questions that we need to be asking? And then secondly, are there any key areas that the church is struggling with when it comes to evangelism with young people? So we'll talk about that for kind of 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of time for feeding back. Fantastic. At the back, have we got a roving mic? Fantastic, that's great. I don't want to cut off your conversations. I would really encourage you keep having those conversations. But what I would love to do is, if in your group you have had a breakthrough moment, you're like, yes, this is going to happen, this needs to be addressed, I'd love just to hear some of that. So if anyone had any kind of key things which they want to feed back, then yeah, now is your time. Anyone? There we go. We've got a couple at the front. We'll go at the front there.
Yeah, I think for us, it was just a real eye-opener. For me, it was just a real eye-opener how much influence the families had, and how much of an impact it has if they don't necessarily feel like they are equipped. So I'm thinking as a youth worker, firstly, in some ways, it's a tiny bit of a relief that that only 9% of the influence comes from a youth worker. But also, how can we be, so for example, when a parent is kind of coming to me saying, could you talk to my son or daughter about this? Should I maybe be more often just doing the simple thing of saying, well, why don't you try talking to them? Here's some ideas of what you could talk about.
Definitely. I think that's really great. I think there are some fantastic things out there. I mean, I was just saying that one of the things with those bits of research, when they're all strung together, like research is expensive. If you do research, you want an end goal. So you say, this is the issue. Wouldn't it be great if this happened? Ta-da, we created it. When you string them all together, you lose that narrative, and you just kind of get a kind of slightly depressing endpoint. But actually, I mean, the Faith and the Families research, they created a resource called Kitchen Table. If you go on their website, you'll be able to get it. And that essentially is a resource which is all about how do we equip parents to sit down with each other and their kids and just have those conversations about what does faith look like in the family. There's other stuff, dads and lads types groups, like actually when we're doing stuff with young people, how do we involve their parents? So yeah, there is some stuff out there, but I think that's a really big area which we need to look at.
Yeah, I think for us, we've been noticing that. So we try to contact the parents and let them know there's a youth event on or something happening, as well as the kids, because the kids don't make up their mind to the last minute. But if their parents are saying, no, you're going to go, we're going to be good parents, and say, you should be at this, that makes a big difference. And we've done a couple of things recently, and we've asked the youth leaders that come to our events to contact the parents, and that started to make a difference in who turns up, and so all that's starting to work. So let the parents know there's something on, as well as the kids, probably the parents first, because the parents go, yeah, there's something, go, you will go, that type of thing.
Great, that's a really great tip. Have we got one last one?
I've only just realised I know nothing about our young people's work at our church. I've just thought, well, let the young ones get on with it. We've got a very effective group of young guys that do it, and girls. But I think my thought on it is that maybe I should go there one evening and see what's going on and not be frightened. They might think, oh, that old girl's there, we're not going there.
100%. I was talking about this. Yeah, I think that does applaud it. I think it's one of those things that so often we get it into our heads that young people come for the stuff, and the people who there need to be as young and as current and fresh as they possibly can. I used the word hip the other day to describe that exact sentiment, and then realised that I'm far from that point. But actually, I mean, I know that I was chatting to a youth worker the other day, and we were reminiscing that actually you'll be walking down the street and you'll bump into a young person, and they'll say, "What are you doing?" And you say, "I'm going to go to Tesco's and do my food shopping." And they'll go, "Can I come with you?" And you go, "Yeah, if you want." For 2 hours, they'll trek around Tesco's with you while you buy aubergines. Like, they're not interested in the stuff. They're interested in you. And the thing they're interested in about you is that you're interested in them. That actually that is something which is so easy for everyone in our church to be doing. But actually, it takes a huge culture shift. And so, yeah, I mean, I think the more people who we can engage in just getting in alongside young people, just being interested in them and having conversations, they're not that scary. But yeah, I'm going to be sticking around at the end. If you want those slides, I mean, I'm sure they'll find some technical way to stick them on the website. But if you come and chat to me afterwards, or my Twitter was up there, Jimmy_Dale. Drop me a tweet with your email address or come see me afterwards, and I will be more than happy to email them across when you can read them on a screen. But yeah, that's it. Brilliant. I think lunch is now.